Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode. We are continuing our larger theme, or larger part two of ways of seeing. And this week we are focusing on art as ideology, or how does ideology, and I'll explain what I mean by ideology, how does it impact art? How does it feed into art? How do artists use ideology? How do they critique ideology? And specifically for this particular episode, since we are going to be thinking about ideology for the entire week, this is really an introduction to how images, how art can act as ideological subjects, how the visual world asks us to react to images in regards to certain ways of thinking, ways of seeing, that has everything to do with politics, culture, society, religion, all of these things. So let's get started. So today you'll be able to answer and discuss the following questions. How visual culture can promote ideologies? How can art and visual culture act as a rhetorical tool using specifically pathos, ethos, and logos? And I'll explain what that is in a little bit, to persuade audiences or affect social change. So when we're thinking about art and ideology, we are really thinking about how visual culture, art, is really asking us to, is persuading us to think about something in a certain way, to evoke a certain aesthetic response in regards to pathos, ethos, and logos, for a certain reason. There's a certain cause, maybe, that we are being asked to partake in or react to, right? And so ideology is a very powerful tool in the artist's toolbox, as well as government entities, political entities, religious entities, etc. Second, how do different historical contexts and events influence art? Sometimes ideology is present in artworks, not because it's intentional, that it's something that, yes, we have those examples of it's an intentional thing of this is what we're trying to do. Sometimes the history and just the context of when something is produced, it illuminates a certain ideology that maybe the artist is aware of, or perhaps the artist is subconsciously adding to their artworks. And lastly, in what ways can artists use their work to critique or promote ideology? So in the opposite sense, artists can be very aware of their own ideology and the ideologies that they're trying to promote, or they're trying to critique in the larger society. So let's take a look at ideology. Ideology, the etymology, so the root of the word, and I love talking about etymology, as you know, because it gives you a deeper understanding of what the word is all about. What is the goal of the word itself? And ideology is a compound word from Greek, meaning idea, which just means idea or notion. It's a concept. And logia means study of, right? So biology is study of organic matter. But so it's basically the study of ideas. And that is very, very true to ideology. The actual definition that you can find is a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. But not just economic and political. Ideology also exists within religion and all sorts of things. I would even argue, and we can think about this, does anything exist outside of ideology, right? Everything is produced through something that is enacting a larger principle or idea, right? And it's really fun for us learning about art and being orientated in art to think about them. And if we can see ideology happening, and perhaps maybe there are more than one ideologies happening in artwork, or maybe how our own ideologies affect how we view artwork. So art and ideology, it's an important part in any consideration of art and politics, is where images are located within their historical trajectory, right? So, today we're going to be looking at a lot of images that were produced during, say, World War II, and that has a huge impact on what we see and the ideology that is embedded within those artworks and images. And it's also an important part to think about how ideology connects different periods and contexts together. For instance, war has been a subject matter of art and imagery in general for a very long time. And we can compare, well, how does one ideology on one conflict compare to another ideology in regards to another conflict, right? We can make cross comparisons. Art really cannot, if we're thinking and focusing on art and images produced by a society, we really cannot escape ideology, right? Art is meaningful. It has value. You don't create art for art's sake. Even art that, quote unquote, is being created for its own sake, that is an ideology in and of itself. It is a product of certain ideas, right? These are human-made, societal-made, cultural-made products. So they are enmeshed, embedded within all sorts of ideas, and we get to unpack them and try to understand where they're coming from, what perspective we are looking at and looking through. And remember back to my discussion of aesthetics in one of the very first weeks of class, right? Aesthetics, keyword, being an experience of art, the experience of art that moves you as an individual in some way beyond just your normal state. Then when you wake up in the morning and you just are, brushing your teeth, right, and just, this regular commonplace world that you experience, the aesthetic is something that moves you off center in some way. Maybe it's mentally, emotionally, physically, psychologically, some visual state. Something is pressing upon you and it's doing something. Art that has a lot of ideology is that it's really banking and hoping that you have an aesthetic response, because ideology and ideas and impact are become so meaningful and embedded within your psyche if it moves you. You remember something that moves you, and you remember perhaps why it moved you, or maybe you don't, but you remember it and it becomes fused in your mind. So if we're thinking about ideology as persuasion, it's trying to persuade you to think or to look through an event or a circumstance through a certain way. If you remember it and you feel it, that is extremely powerful, right? It's a powerful tool for political engagement, societal engagement. So let's take a look at how something can persuade. How does ideology try to present an argument that it wants you to engage with? Well, it has everything to do with rhetoric. And hopefully some of you, maybe all of you, I'm hoping, have seen this triangle before in perhaps most likely an English or writing class that you've had. It's a very common thing to be taught when you're learning how to write an essay, and that is the rhetorical triangle. And it's a triangle because there are 3 points of persuasion that either in some way you could have them separately, very effective, but even more effective if you're thinking about persuading someone, you need more than one. You need all of these things really working together to create a very persuasive argument and perspective. And so this is a rhetorical triangle, and its components are logos, ethos, and pathos. And so rhetoric in general is the study of written, spoken, and visual language. So not just visual art, that can persuade, but you can debate. You can argue with your spoken words, and maybe some of you have been at a debate club or know someone who's been in a debate club. That's something where you use your words and use oration to persuade. A lot of politics, as we think in Washington, is very much about spoken rhetoric, but then there's also written rhetoric. Academic writing and that type of argumentation. And the written is probably where a lot of you have probably seen the rhetorical triangle, because writing an essay, you are asking your reader to buy into your interpretation, your hypothesis, your particular perspective on something versus any other perspective. And that's really the goal of a really well-crafted written essay. Rhetoric in general. And so let's think about logos, pathos, and ethos. And these are all Latin words for appeals, different appeals to emotions and different perspectives. So logos is the root of something like logic. And so it is appealing to an audience's sense of reason, common sense, logic, right? It's trying to defeat any sense that your perspective is irrational and unfounded. So for instance, right, let's think about a news article that comes on your feed, it's suggested to you, and perhaps it's about the newest variant of COVID-19, right? And you take a look, and so what would be more persuasive for that type of article? Would you want it from someone who is a medical professional, someone who studies viruses, someone else in the medical field? Or would it be more persuasive if it's just someone who's not in the medical field, just someone totally unrelated to viruses and medicine? Most of us would probably appeal to someone who we see study something, they know what they're talking about. They probably go at it at a very empirical, logical, rational way. So an article about, well, what is it about? What are some of the ways that we can deal with it? What are the symptoms? Something just very straightforward that's not adding a lot of emotion or a subjective character to something like, a pandemic or disease, right? And that would be an appeal to logos. Next, we have pathos, which means an appeal to emotion and feeling. So a bit of the opposite of logos. And pathos and logos often can compete with each other. We don't often see them coming together in the same way, but sometimes. But it's an appeal to emotion and feeling. It's trying to get you riled up, angry, sad, depressed, right? And as a way to appeal to you. So for example, say you're watching a commercial that is about it's about a medicine, but it's a medicine that is helping something. Let's just say it like arthritis, just off the top of my head. But the actual commercial is showing you someone who is really struggling with, say, arthritis, and suddenly they take this new drug and they can hold their grandchild without feeling pain. They can be active, right? That's really appealing to pathos. It might be something like it's related to medicine, but it's showing you, well, wow, this person is having, is happier, is involved in life more. It's really tugging at your emotional strings to perhaps, if you are struggling with that disease, to look into that drug, or perhaps someone and you are moved and you've seen this struggle, and then maybe you pass that information on. That would be an example of an appeal to emotion and feeling. And then lastly, we have ethos. And ethos is the root of something like ethics, so being ethical. And that is an appeal to an audience's, your moral character, your ethics, right? Your sense of right and wrong, right? And so, things that are trying to appeal to this, they are actually can be very black and white. Like there's usually a right way in a wrong way, right? And it's really trying to appeal to a certain set of morals, right? And it's a little tricky with ethos because not everyone's, it's like, what morals and ethics are you appealing to, right? And usually it's very targeted appeals to ethos, very specific to particular communities on certain issues that have a moral or ethical base essence to it that is the root of persuading people to that particular argument. So that's rhetoric. This is the appeals. And for the rest of the episode, we're going to be having a little journey through different examples of artworks throughout history that I've chosen. And we're really going to think about how are they embedded within a particular historical context of how can we understand where the ideologies are coming from, but then what are they appealing to? Logos, pathos, ethos is some combination. So in the second part, we will be doing that analysis.